of my classes, which is ridiculous. But anyway, so there's 2 assignments for this week. The first one is, hopefully unsurprisingly, this procedural texturing assignment. And basically for that, you're just going to, you have basically 2 options. You can make your own object or like use an object you've already done stuff to before. So either make your own object or you can use this weird little shaderbot file. He's in the sample model thing on Drive, and I've also linked him under the assignment himself. Shaderbot is like that sassy little robot guy that I had like giving people the finger because I'm a spaz. But you can pose him. So if you do use shaderbot, again, pose him some halfway decent way. Make him look cute. Try to get some kind of story behind his pose. You know, I kind of designed him to look punky. You're welcome to like get rid of his mohawk or whatever if you want, or like do whatever to him. But try to get him into a scene, like pose him in a way that it looks like it's kind of telling a story. What I always go to is like, what if he's just, you know, hunched in an alley wall with like a trash can next to him and he's like really sad and rusted, that kind of thing. All of the pieces of him should all be UV'd. The scales of the UVs are different, but there's nothing overlapping and everything should, you know, show up well and stuff. Just don't delete the history on the eyelids. They won't shape change properly. Not the end of the world, but... and then you can do whatever for the eyes. I just sort of did a thing. I just added generic textures, but you should ideally go through and like make, if you're gonna be, like make the textures look nicer, then, because I just threw on default surface shaders and changed the color. And again, you're welcome to modify him, like add different hair, different eyelid, like what, I don't really care what you do to him, I just thought it might be more fun than doing other things. I don't know. So that's shaderbot. If you want to make your own model, I'm partial to like axes or metal tool, like something with metal in it, because I think it's relatively easy to find different layers to add in there. Fruit is also reasonable. Fire hydrants are also good if you want to like make a fire hydrant. If you're feeling super unfancy, you're welcome to just like texture a shader ball. I mean, if you just Google shader balls, there's like a bunch of different variations. Mostly the idea is that they would just have certain features that you're looking to show off in your texture. So like the one that I made, of course I closed it. Or like the shader ball that I made, I closed that too. That's upsetting. You know, I wanted certain areas where you could really see the outside, like the curvature on the outside to like really get those nice areas of wear. So I put, you know, a bunch of hard edges on my ball. I put some areas where it's like gonna be much more heavily occluded. So if you do make your own shader ball, just like, you know, try to keep in mind like what you're trying to show off in your texture and make sure that you have enough different surfaces and curves that you can actually sort of see the variation within your texture, if that makes sense. Just be aware that if you do choose to do a shader ball, it's gonna get you like the minimum grade for model complexity because shader balls are like super boring and not particularly artistic. So like ideally, again, that you would do like a fire hydrant or like something more interesting. But you could use a shader ball if you wanted to. All shaderbot is basically a shader ball with an eyeball and a body. But anywho. So any questions on like the models that are good for this assignment? All right. Again, you should UV your stuff before texturing it, especially if you're using texture maps. And then in terms of the textures themselves, I would like you to use at least 3 different materials in whatever your final shader is. So by that, I just mean like the base textures like chrome, rust, car paint. There should be at least 3 of those plugged in to create your final look. And then if you want to use like texture maps, again, for like grab texture maps for a nicer looking rust texture or whatever kind of metal you're looking for, you're welcome to use texture maps for that kind of stuff, for scratches, whatever. But like the overall look and like how your shader works should be done procedurally. So like all of like the placement of the dust and the grime and the rust should all be done procedurally. Does this make sense? Cool. And then in terms of model expectations, just like you're shooting for like a cool, interesting, realistic looking material. Probably is going to be easier to show grime and textures instead of trying to do something super clean. If you want to try to do something super clean, I'm curious to see what you guys come up with. But grime is like, it's pretty straightforward to like think of different materials to use for grime. which is why I suggest metal, because a lot of times it'll be painted or like have rust, that kind of stuff. And then in terms of what you actually need to submit, basically just 3 to 4 renders of the object, pretty similar to all the other assignments. For this particular assignment, I would like you to pick one of the render angles from your like complete shader renders, and also render out a render for each of the base materials you use, so like for the chrome, the rust, the paint, because I want to see how they stand on their own, when instead of just like only being able to see it in the render, if that makes sense. So again, you should have one render view that shows like a final render and then one of each of your base materials. Also, please throw in, if you use any file textures, throw those in as well. And if you use any reference images, one thing that's kind of fun is like going out and just looking at, I don't know, look at the ground and see what's happening with the like storm drains and stuff like that, or like the walls behind urban have like all these crazy textures in them. That would actually probably be pretty cool to do with procedural texturing. And then if you wouldn't mind just like removing, if you have like 7 versions of this, of like your Maya files or whatever, just like get rid of the ones that aren't relevant or like not your latest ones, because it does take me forever to like download stuff sometimes, and it's confusing to if there's like a bunch of different files. That's pretty much that. Are there any questions about that? All right. That's pretty much that assignment. The other assignment that you guys have this week is another pre-production assignment. So this week, you basically just be making a digital floor plan of your space. This is the thing that you do individually, not as a group. And the requirements of the space, so I mentioned this last week, but at least 1 window and at least 1 door. And this one is, as far as I'm concerned, a soft requirement, but it should fit within a 10 by 12 foot space. Read more that you probably don't want to do like a giant banquet hall or like a huge open space, because the goal of the final is to really make something that looks lived in and used, and like a realistic space, which usually there's stuff in a space, and it's going to be way easier to populate a smaller room than it is a ginormous like banquet hall. So again, I don't care if it's like perfectly 10 by 12 or whatever, just like, you know, pick something that is reasonable for you to actually accomplish. So yeah. But basically, it's more or less the same assignment as like the first assignment from CGI1, where you're just sort of like blocking in stuff, and you're going to do it to scale. So again, just rough layer of like furniture stuff, and like windows, doors, etc. You're also going to include the objects, all the like hero objects and stuff that you guys are remaking. So you should get the measurements of those objects from your teammates. Yep.
So this is basically just gray boxing?
Pretty much. If you want to get more in depth with it, you're welcome to. But yeah, it's pretty much just gray boxing. Me personally, I'd probably just go through and model the entire environment and be like, ha ha ha, it's done. But I'm a spaz. But yeah, so yeah, pretty much is just gray boxing. But you do want to make sure that everything is to scale. And there's a few reasons for that. You should just get practice modeling things for scale, because it's a pretty common thing to do. But also, it's going to be a lot easier when you get files from your teammates. Having everything modeled to scale is going to prevent you from, you know, throwing in something and having it be like the size of a pinhead or like engulf your entire scene. You should be able to just put it in and have it be the correct size. So that's the other reason that you guys should be making stuff to scale. And I'm not going to lie, whenever I have to make something to scale, I just figure out what my units are in Maya. I work in millimeters, and then I'll just go in and be like, cool, this thing is like 3 feet high. I'll just be like 3 feet 2 millimeters. Make a giant stick, like literally just a plane that's 914 units tall, and then I'll just scale my object up until it is pretty much like the same height as that stick. That is literally how I make things to scale. It's not a particularly fancy approach, but it works. Yeah. And then, like, your space doesn't need to be square. I always think like weird rooms with like corners cut out is interesting. This is a good chance to start blocking in if you want to do interesting architectural features like archways or you know, sloped ceilings, anything like that. That's something you could sort of start to get a feel from this week. And then when I say include measurements of your walls, furniture, objects, I don't need the measurements of like every little thing, just like for large stuff in your scene, or like especially the main objects. Just like take a render of your scene, throw it into Photoshop, and just, if you have a bed that's like 3 feet by 4 feet, just draw a little line and be like 4 feet, and that's really all I need for that. And then just like label for like major pieces of furniture, if you could just like also label what they are or something, if it's just gonna be a cube. So I have some idea of what this is going to turn into. Any questions about that? Yep.
So we're just basically going to mine on like wherever we would have, or an image of an object, we would just put like a cube or something there to represent it, right?
Yep. Yeah, you're welcome to go more in depth if cube, because like personally, for my own workflow, I literally never do this.
Yeah.
So if it's easier for you to like start modeling actual furniture or something like that, you're welcome to go ahead and do that. Mm-hmm.
You said it has to fit a 10 by 12 space.
Yeah.
So that means it can't be bigger than 10 by 12. Just want to make sure.
I don't care if it's like 15 by 15, just like, especially if you have like ginormous objects in your scene, but like.
Okay, so for example, the one my group chose was a 50s diner.
Nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
is that too big? 10 by 12 is not enough space.
That's not enough space for a diner.
Yeah,
but like
that's
a lot of
not
the
even
objects are
close
big,
to
so
another
like booths,
Right.
tables,
Yeah.
sinks.
So I'm gonna tell you a story. Not really, but for my CGI1 final, I did a CGI or like a diner, like a retro diner. I think you can populate that. What you could do if you're worried, because like also a lot of those objects repeat, so like tables and stuff like that. What you could do is just sort of like populate the whole space. So if you wanted to render from a certain angle, you'd like have tables with whatever on them, and then just like focus in on a specific corner, and center in on that with like a jukebox or like whatever other like complicated stuff. That's kind of like how I would approach that. Like if you did want to do a bigger space, just sort of like maybe pick one area to focus on, and then have that be like your little cluster area, and everything else just sort of background. Yeah. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions on what's expected for that floor plan? Cool. And then for submitting that, just throw in your Maya scene with the space, your rendered image with and without labels. And also, if you've done any concept sketches, throw those in as well. I don't need duplicates, but like if you've done, sketching for your room or whatever, throw those in. Not required, but if you have them, put them in. So that is pretty much that. Yes?
Can we use something other than Maya to render this art?
I don't necessarily care, I suppose. What were you thinking of?
Because like there are construction programs just
Oh,
presets and you know where things are
gotcha.
and like you'll probably start doing actual furniture.
If you yeah, I don't really care what you guys model in, as long as the final result looks decent. Like if you guys are on your home computers or like you're familiar with like architectural programs or like CAD stuff, you want to use that, totally fine with that, as long as it ports into whatever you're rendering the final in properly. I guess that's fine. Yeah, cool. Any other stuff? All right, be free. Happy week 4.